Hey everyone. So I have my interview today with Jake Freeman, and it's going to be a Q&A. Basically, they're going to be Reddit questions, some of my own questions. We'll see where this goes, and we're just going to just dive right into things right now. The first question is, so can you elaborate on what's going on with Scott Freeman and like everyone's taking his departure? They're like creating meaning out of it. I just want you to let us know what's going on with Scott Freeman.
Thanks, Adam, for the question. I think, yeah, people are kind of blowing it a little out of proportion. It's just sort of to ensure there's no conflicts here. Scott was a great leader for sort of a peace initiative and sort of his history and such with the company. We don't think that'd be the best for him to lead the sort of more warlike posturing here. So that's really it. There's no bigger conspiracy or story here. It's basically just avoiding conflict. When he becomes a board member, we want to make sure that he's isn't conflicted in any way. We don't think there's any issue there, but we just want it for abundance of caution to kind of separate him. We want to make it clear that he's willing to come on, and talk about the medical side of things in more detail if that's something people want to hear. He still supports the value enhancement plan, and he looks forward to voting at the general meeting or requisition meeting.
Awesome. So I guess so the goal is to get him on the board, on Mindmed's board, correct?
That is still the goal, yes.
All right, awesome. All right, so that makes sense. All right, so now we're going to just jump right into the Reddit questions. And I guess let's just get it kicking. So the first question we have is, where do you see Mindmed's relationship to others within the psychedelic sector? This is like a four-part question, so that's just the first part.
Sure. I think MindMed has somewhat of a interesting intersection. It was obviously the first company to go publicly traded within the psychedelic sector, and they're sort of differently positioned compared to Compass or Atai. But I really see them kind of separate. I don't think there's really right now any real consolidation in the psychedelic sector. It's sort of every man for himself right now. I don't really see that changing. I think obviously there's some interesting stuff with respect to Ceruvia, but I imagine I'll be expanded on later. But that's sort of the only other intersection I can really think of.
Got you. All right. So to build on that is like, so what do you see as Mindmed's strengths and weaknesses?
I think the strengths here is really Dr. Lechty in Switzerland. He is a foremost expert on these issues, and I mean, we keep seeing him just keep putting out amazing, stellar research time after time again. MindMed of their, I think I did a count, it was like 12 studies that's going on. I think like 9 are from him. He's really a foremost expert in the psychedelic thing, and the fact that we have exclusive rights to his research is, I think, the biggest strength there. I think the weakness really is sort of, I don't really have much confidence in management's ability to execute on sort of the IP that he is sort of giving. And I think I'll go into detail. I'm sure there'll be a question about it, but we can go into more detail later about sort of how we don't have confidence in their drug development plan. I think management has made a lot of strategic errors, and I think that's really the issue here is sort of management doesn't seem to be able to capitalize on this stellar research.
Actually, yeah, if you want to, can you build on the you said management has made some strategic errors. Can you build on that a little bit?
Sure. So what I really want to focus here is on their phase 1 study with MM110. So Barrow sort of announced that the FDA suddenly requested these more preclinical trials to sort of be able to get them into the phase 2. And the real question here is those trials we've known about for a long time. The FDA doesn't just suddenly pop out of nowhere and say we want more trials. They're a government agency, and government agencies are constrained by sort of arbitrary and capricious rulemaking and a variety of federal regulations. So usually the FDA will come forward a long time ago. So my question really is did Barrow even read the FDA minutes? It's an important part of FDA 101 is to read the minutes historically. And the question really is, are these trials the same one that have been known for years? Because they were known back when Scott was there. And, the question really is, why didn't Barrow ask probably the world's foremost expert on MM110, Scott Freeman, for advice on going to the FDA here? This really shows that management is not willing to listen to outside parties, and the results are not great. Management kind of ignored what the FDA was doing or what the FDA wanted, and the result is sort of the shelving of a potentially blockbuster drug. And, if Barrow doesn't really understand FDA 101, can we really expect him to understand FDA 301?
So let me ask you this. So you're saying, in terms of Robert Barrow, I know he has experience as he's like a expert on patents, no? Or is it? I think for one of the companies he was working for, I remember they were saying like his field of interest is patent stuff. So do you think, in terms of his unwillingness to listen to the outside, to outside people, like for example, like Scott Freeman, do you think that's something that's built out of hubris, or there's just something else there?
Well, Scott Freeman, if he reached out, would have been under a confidentiality agreement. He technically is still a consultant there.
Mm-hmm.
So there would have been no issue there from a patent and legal perspective. I think a real issue here is that Barrow doesn't have an advanced degree. And the question is, most people in this field have PhDs and MDs. And the question is, Barrow doesn't have that. So is he trying to make up for something? And is that, attempted to make up for those things, hurting shareholder value? And, it seems to me like the only thing bigger than Rob Barrow's ego is his paycheck. And that's not something we want in a company where the goal here is getting drugs to market. And our patients deserve better. Lots of people would benefit significantly from progress in MM110. And I think that really also ties into the fact that they did a 7-day dosing study for MM110. So 7-day dosing study basically means you treat opioid withdrawal, which is actually much harder to study, because to do opioid withdrawal studies, you have to sort of get people when they're kind of in the middle of an overdose, they're in the emergency room. It's a lot harder to sort of test those things. But when you're doing opioid addiction, which is what a 30-day dose and what MM110 really should be focused on, you basically, you have to get people who are addicted to opioids, and you can do the regulatory endpoint can be looking at sort of 30 days or 60 days after they, finish their dosing, is there any opioids in their urine? And so that's also an easier way, and obviously a lot bigger market. Opioid addiction could save tens of thousands of lives per year and save countless families and people's lives, just not even from death, but all the other collateral effects. And, opioid withdrawal has a lot more limited market potential, and there's also competitors in that space. So we think those were two really big strategic errors they made with MM110.
Why do you think they went for opioid withdrawal as opposed to opioid addiction?
Sure. So opioid withdrawal is an easier thing to get done. You're able to get it done faster. You have a lot more prep work, and legwork that has to get done to get into a 30-day dose. You can't just suddenly dose people for 30 days. The FDA is going to want to see some more intermediate steps, but it has bigger dividends in the long run. And we think management potentially is either short-sighted, or they just, really just want to be able to show they're making quote unquote progress without really thinking, longer term or bigger picture.
Understood. Okay, the next part of this question is, given the recent drama to Mindmed, which you're very familiar with, and current bearishness across the stock market, what compels you to hold this particular investment?
Look, I think it's a company where there's a lot of value here, and we're actively trying to effectuate that value. This isn't just simply buy and hold. This is buy and make the company better. This is us doing the legwork to get the price to a better spot and get the market into a better area for Mind Medicine. That's one of the things, if you're an active person or you're an active shareholder, it's a little different than just simply a buy and hold, because here we're really trying to actually effectuate the change needed to unlock significant shareholder value. And, I think obviously the market isn't doing too great, but, we're on a clock here. We think that we have very limited time to get Mindmed where it needs to be. And we don't have time to wait for a better macroeconomic environment or environment where, sentiment is better. Sort of our hand is somewhat forced in these issues. And that's just sort of how the cookie crumbles.
Got you. Okay, the next question. Now that dilution has occurred, are you a more minor shareholder? What is the plan to get your agenda passed with even less power? I don't think that question, I think there are some flaws to it, but yeah, go for it.
I mean, obviously talking about cookies, when you have a bigger cookie, but you have the same, you have the same, I guess, raisin, that raisin's obviously going to be less. It's a slightly larger pie and you have the same size slice. That said, I think this has really galvanized a lot of support, and we've been talking with major shareholders in Mind Medicine who have expressed their support for us. And I think that ultimately this dilution has actually probably brought more people into sort of the at least we need to see something happen here and see some change. So I would say that, ultimately it's not really a big deal. Obviously the price has dropped significantly. So if we need to, purchase or acquire more shares to sort of effectuate our end goals, I don't think that's really an issue.
Understood. Okay, so this leads into the next question. So basically, is FCM planning on increasing their position in MyMed much further? You essentially just answered that. You're willing to do it, but are there any plans like outside of just like maintaining your specific size position to increase the position?
Right now we see that a lot can happen, a lot can change. So we have obviously different plans for different outcomes and different sort of things that happen along the way. I'm not going to get into direct details, but some of those plans do involve, taking a larger and significantly larger position if necessary to sort of really push forward our agenda.
Okay, cool. So that leads to this one. How does Freeman Capital ensure retail that they are in it for the long haul and not trying to just lift the SP and liquidate their full position?
Like if we just wanted to liquidate, we could have sold, uh, you know, at any time sort of on the way up. Sort of there's that one day that spiked a bit. There was plenty of opportunities. And I think the real assurance here, without anything legally binding, is really the fact that we have a lot vested in this from a personal standpoint. I mean, obviously monetary standpoint as well, and that we really see significant value long term when these drugs get approved. And I guess the most assured solution is assume people are acting in their own self-interest, and if we think that we can get a significant value out of MindMed by getting these drugs approved, that obviously would reflect in the stock price and obviously be higher than just a short-term sort of quote unquote squeeze. So that's sort of there. I mean, we'll probably commit at some point in writing to not selling any of our shares. I know Scott made that commitment for his own sort of portion of FCM in his shares. So it's obviously there, and we'll obviously adjust going forward.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and seems like it's going to be a trend with other psychedelic companies too. We saw Itai locked up their shares for I think another year or so, maybe even more. So just interesting. Next question. The market cap is so low. If you are so confident, why don't you just buy 51% and make some real changes? I'm sure you have some friends that would want in.
Well, I think the issue that people probably are not so aware of is you can't just simply acquire 51% of a company. So basically, once you get above certain amounts, you have certain regulatory filings, and then also, the real issue here would be essentially what prevents management from, engaging in a quote poison pill solution or anything else to really hemorrhage us in order to prevent us from acquiring those percent ownerships. So there's a lot of other factors there. That's one of the reasons why you don't see hostile takeovers as often these days. They do eventually somewhat happen in a decent amount of cases, but it generally is not something that occurs as often. And so we don't see that as a viable option at this time.
That's valid. The next question. So, what other, if there are any other, psychedelic companies are you invested in, and which one are most of your capital in? I think we know the answer here.
Well, Mindmed is the main holding here. I don't personally have any ownership in any other psychedelic companies. I believe Scott has a little bit of ownership in Compass, but again, nothing really compared to the ownership within Mindmed.
All right, good to know. Thanks. All right, so now this is the part two to the same question. Um, does Freeman believe that Barrow is being an effective steward of mind medicine and shareholder value with his current next to none PA initiative to drive interest into the company? What should Barrow do to increase investor interest?
Look, I think the number one way to increase investor interest is to get results. And I think that's something that's been lacking from Barrow's camp. we were supposed to have this phase 2B trial. It was supposed to start last year. It was announced at the 2021 annual meeting. Now it's this year. And we're very skeptical of the timelines he gives investors. I think giving people realistic timelines is also important. So we really think that the number one thing here is get the results. And we're not seeing that. And we don't really have confidence in his ability to get them over the near term. Eventually, even a broken clock is right twice a day. He can eventually get the results, but we think investors need to see more imminent results on better timelines. Going to that phase 2B trial, Compass, as we just mentioned earlier, they did a very similar, slightly less complicated phase 2B trial, and it took them 3 years. So I think to say that Mindmed will take a year and a half is sort of a little insane. Similar dimensions in terms of sites, patients. Theirs was a 3-arm study. Mindmeds is a 5-arm study, so more arms, more complicated. But we think it's really unlikely that they're going to be able to hit the goals in which they're sort of espousing. And they only have 9 clinics open of 20 that they need to have. So they seem to be behind schedule on that. And we think that's really an issue, because when you keep telling shareholders this and then another thing happens, it's really hard to have interest. So we believe in effective timelines that are clearly communicated and getting results done. And we don't think Barrow is really a great person to do either one of those.
Got you. All right. So now here are the next 2 questions. So these were titled spin questions. Not sure what that means, but I think the angle on them is supposed to have spin on it. Who knows? Since your uncle has lost confidence in, okay, now I understand it. So basically, this question is being posed as, do you think that Freeman Capital Management will have enough backing from the top minds in the medical/psychedelic space to continue your fight against Mindmed management?
I think we have talked to a significant amount of very intelligent people with significant degrees who are all for our plan. So I think there's certainly a lot of academic and professional interest in this. And, in a lot of our communications with, other major shareholders who have a lot of experience in the psychedelic space, including some who sort of bought in sort of a VC, PE sort of scenario, they all have a lot more confidence in our plan, at least, than Barrow's.
Got you. So now, so there's going to be there's this legal battle between Freeman Capital Management and Stephen Hurst, and now you have what do you foresee? Like, basically, Mindmed essentially can keep diluting to keep the funds up. Do you foresee this entering a legal battle with Mindmed as well, or like how do you foresee this playing out with Mindmed?
Sure. So I think obviously we are exploring and we continue to talk to our legal counsel about the best ways to engage in these actions. One of the at least decent things about their most recent dilutive offering is there's a clause in there which basically says they agree not to sell any more shares for 90 days. So that gives a bit of a window to sort of, clean shop and clean house and prevent, sort of that continuing. Obviously, if they continue to do these things, it really, even this one offering rings bells of defensive action, entrenchment, shareholder oppression. Obviously, they'll always have their own quote unquote excuse for it, but it's really hard to find a real justification. Either then they have no confidence in their own plan to really unlock value for shareholders in the short term, or they're just doing this to sort of stay in power. And both of those is not a good sign for a company's management. Yeah.
All right, cool. So random question. Are you in touch with any of the heavy investors in Mindmed, like Kevin O'Leary? And if so, do you know if he remains invested?
I will not comment on the first part of that question. Based on the most recent shareholder records that I have that we requested from the company back in end of June, July timeframe, he was still an investor. However, those are out of date, obviously, so I'm not aware at this time. And also, I think some of the records may be from all the way back in April 2021. So I'm not 100% sure. His name did appear in a couple of the records. The records were not well kept, to be honest. He's not a registered shareholder, so that sort of solves that issue. But, we didn't see him on the proxy voting for the 2021 annual or 2022 meeting. So I can't really say, but it did appear at least that he was still an investor.
Okay, cool. And all right, so that's the end of the questions from Reddit. So now I'm gonna start. It's gonna be my own questions. So, just building off that, do you know, did J.R. Rand have to liquidate his position when he left his position at Mindmed?
There was no requirement for him to liquidate any of his position. My understanding, looking at the regulatory filings that are publicly available on the Canadian website, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's SEDI. He sold most of his shares prior to even leaving as CEO. So I don't think there's any requirement for him to liquidate. Yeah, that's all I can say about that.
Got you, got you. All right, so now I wanted to just focus on some of the things that we spoke about last time a little bit and just kind of build on them. So now, in regards to, let's say, some of the patent issues revolving around Mindred right now, so we have them pursuing MM120. Uh, that's for GAD, generalized anxiety disorder, the MM120. Or am I misquoting that?
I think that's one of their. They have a lot. They have a lot. Obviously, have a lot of intended
So
sort of things they're trying to do with it. But I think that's one of them.
based on some of the things that we've read from the lawsuit or from the documents in the lawsuit, do you think it's pointless for them to continue just pushing MM120 through the pipeline right now, because they don't really have exclusive rights to it at the end of the day either?
I mean, I think, obviously Scott in his lawsuit really emphasizes that we want to get the IP back. The IP needs to be returned to Mindmed. And, that's really where it is. So I think pursuing it's fine. And I think continuing to spend money on it. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, the transaction, which sort of resulted in this, in my opinion, was not arm's length and should be disallowed. So I think that ultimately should continue pursuing MM120, but I think Mindmed needs to vigorously, defend its intellectual property rights, as well as ensuring that there are no freedom to operate clauses in any of their contracts, and investigating any former personnel who may have engaged in contracts that were not at arm's length and were not in Mindmed's best interest.
All right, so let's build on this a little bit more. So now we have so we basically have the patents in question, and essentially, so why do you think that Mindmed? Why did it take you guys to basically start this lawsuit and go at Mindmed, or go at Stephen Hurst and Turnbull essentially, in order to get the IP back? Why was Mindmed not doing this already? And is it possible they were trying to do it already? We just haven't been hearing about it at all.
Look, if they were trying to do it already, I think it would raise serious issues in their disclosures to shareholders for them to, be parallel telling shareholders that there is no issues with their IP and telling them how confident they are in their IP strategy and not even disclosing this transaction while at the same time trying to fight for it. It'd be one of those, why are the two orders? And I think that would be a serious issue for Mindmed to have done that. So I don't believe that they would have done that. I don't believe any external legal counsel would advise that they continue those in parallel pursuits. I think the reason really comes down to it is that, it doesn't really look good for Mindmed if they were to pursue these, especially given that they've known about them for so long. At this point, for them to pursue it without, really sort of a clean house, it really looks like, they've been, obviously, I would hate for them, they would hate to see the discovery documents on that. And obviously one of the discovery issues is going to be, how long did you know about this? And, given that, as mentioned in the lawsuit, Scott sent a letter to them, back in August of 2021, sort of detailing this whole thing. And they obviously have known about it since then. So it would look really bad and probably have some serious securities law implications if they were to try and really go from a public avenue on this.
Yeah, so also based off the court documents as well, it essentially, the way we're looking at Mindmed right now is are they just a publicly traded R&D company for Ceruvia? That's what it's starting to seem like, in terms of if everything is accurate in terms of the court documents and what comes out of that.
Sure, obviously I can't comment on the veracity of the claims, since some of this information is confidential, and obviously, as you know, it was redacted and it was not supposed to have a public angle. Unfortunately, legal counsel in the defense, it was led by Hurst. Obviously, I'm not sure if it was his lawyers or not. uh, resulted in it becoming public. Uh,
Wait, hold on.
but
Hurst leaked the documents?
it was no, sorry, my apologies for the miscommunication there. It was Hearst's legal counsel. So basically, the defendants of the lawsuit were the ones who leaked it accidentally, or at
Okay.
least ostensibly accidentally. Uh, Obviously, I don't know the intricate motivations that any of them have for doing it.
Okay,
Our
sorry
guess
to
is
interrupt you. You can continue
yeah.
also.
So, it's very concerning to see uh, these allegations, and these allegations we believe obviously have a lot of merit, but essentially these allegations allege that Mindmed can't compete with Ceruvia and BOL 148, which is obviously a drug that Barrow himself touted. He didn't name it by name, but he touted a drug that only descriptive drug out there that matches it would be BOL 148. In his first couple months as CEO, to a Forbes interview. So obviously that's a serious issue. The other serious issue is that Mindmed, anything Mindmed develops with respect to LSD, Ceruvia gets to use without any licensing issues. That's so basically a patent. Most people think a patent is the right to produce something, but it excludes anyone else from producing it. So when you give someone else the ability to produce it, and essentially the ability, you no longer have the right to exclude them. It raises serious issues that we're spending all this money on these drugs that potentially another company can essentially knock off and make generic. So that's a serious issue. Obviously, Mindmed contributing $5 million to a NYU clinic that has a lot of ties with Ceruvia is another issue. It would be like Compass giving $5 million to Lefty Labs. Obviously, there can be some potential benefits for Compass, but the general beneficiary of Compass giving $5 million to Lefty Labs would be Mind Medicine, in the fact that Mind Medicine or Dr. Lefty would have more funds to pursue more research, which would obviously be helpful to Mindmed. So there's some serious issues there, and obviously the mixing of Ceruvia and Mindmed employees for a while is another serious issue. The former COO, or sorry, the current COO of Ceruvia, concurrently worked as a program manager at Mind Medicine, and there's a couple other examples of people who worked with Ceruvia while working at Mind at the same time. So it certainly raises serious issues and serious concerns investors should have.
Was Scott still working for the company when this was going on?
No. He left kind of, obviously you can draw your own conclusions, but he publicly left, a few months prior to all this.
Can you? Okay, got understood. Um, so all right, to build more on this in terms of the connection with Ceruvia and Mindmed, and now we're gonna do like Stephen Hurst, Turnbull, whatever. So let's focus on Turnbull for now. So basically, so from what I was reading, Turnbull and Barrow go back with each other. So they both worked at USONA together. I think Barrow was the head of drug development there, and I'm not sure what position Turnbull had. So are
Sure.
you guys aware of this? And is this something that like concerns? Is this something that like led to some of the concerns where what kind of like built up to what's been going on with like the lawsuit and whatever?
Sure, certainly. Yeah, we've been aware of the Barrow Turnbull connection. Obviously, also USONA is a major supporter of Barrow's, or not, sorry, of Ceruvia and some other Ceruvia's or Turnbull kind of charity links there. So obviously that's a serious issue. And, given that Barrow is touting sort of a drug that Mindmed could never compete on and was sort of in the domain of Ceruvia, it's a serious issue too. And I think that it's something that really requires some scrutiny here. And I think we all would like to know, how did, you know, Barrow join Mindmed? Did Steve Hurst bring him in because Steve had connections with Turnbull, or was he brought in kind of unrelated? It's a serious question that we have, and I think Barrow should be answering that. And I think we all deserve to know the answer there. I mean, they're given the small gap between his time at USONA and his time when he started at Mindmed. It's a non-trivial question. I think it really raises concerns about Barrow's allegiances and if there's any influences there. Maybe that's the reason why Mindmed is not pursuing these IP issues.
Understood. Leads me to the next question. So it's like, is BOL 148? So like I've been doing more reading on it, and it's extremely intriguing. Is that kind of the crown jewel here in terms of what you want to get back? Yeah.
Look, BOL148 has significant potential, and I think LSD does too. I think BOL148 is more in its infancy. Uh, it has a lot longer of a sort of time to development path, and I think it's very valuable. I think LSD is also valuable. Obviously, it's something we've invested a lot of money into as Mindmed shareholders uh, in getting done, and I think there's still a lot of potential there, and I think it will probably be to market faster than BL148. But BL148, I think longer term has significant value that eclipses the value of the LSD drug. And so we'd like to see that sort of at least Mindmed being able to start, really ramping up clinical trials on those IP, without any interference with Ceruvia.
Got you. Can you kind of lay out how you foresee kind of the pathway to generating revenue through LSD for Mindmed, like if you guys took over, for example?
Sure. So we have a plan that basically in about 6 months, we would go to basically, and we develop a plan for a phase 3 trial. It would take about 3 months. It takes about 6 months total. So about by month 2, you send your preliminary results or your preliminary plan to the FDA. Sort of a month later, you'll send a more exhaustive one. So the FDA will already have sort of parallel working on that. Then about 3 months later, you'll kind of meet with the FDA and they'll give you a decision. Assuming that goes according to our plan with getting the phase 3, we think that it'll take about 3 to 4 years to get a drug through the phase 3 trials and approved by the FDA. And then following that, we really see that we can just start selling this from a, pharmaceutical perspective to doctors for patients with generalized anxiety disorder. So that's really the timeline there. There'll obviously be some smaller issues along the way. And one of the things, though, that we can do to generate money sort of along the way would be once we had the manufacturing process sort of set up for the wide scale distribution of these LSD drugs, we can also sell some of that LSD to other research clinics and such like that who would want access to these drugs on a FDA manufacturing practices side of things. And sort of that's where we see the revenue. We don't see this as a revenue generator for another 3 or 4 years at least.
So when we're referring to LSD, we're referring to this is a formulation of LSD that Mindmed has patented already, but do not have exclusive rights to, basically, like we've learned through the court documents.
Yes, that is correct. I mean, whenever I say LSD, I'm referring to MM120. Obviously, people might not confuse the names between MM120, MM110, MM402. So just to sort of, in the interest of sort of just being clear, I'm just referring to, whenever I say LSD, I refer to MM120.
Got you. Understood. Thank you very much. Okay, Jake. So to continue on from the last question. So now, from the court documents, we're learning that, once again, the mishandling of IP in regards to Mindmed, and I guess Barrow at this point too, seems extremely, extremely significant. So how far, if you can speak on this, does this bleed into other projects that Mindmed has going on right now? So, or at least that they stopped 18MC so can you just elaborate more on, I guess, how deep this runs within some of the IP that Mindmed has?
Look, obviously, we only know what is available in the court documents, but obviously, if these issues existed with one drug that happens to be their biggest drug, the question really is out there. How are they handling their IP for their smaller drugs that potentially are not going to be looked at with as much scrutiny? So I think it sets more of a precedent. I can't speak to any individual drug. I like to hope that they are maintaining their IP as they need to, but I think that actions speak louder than words, and the actions that we've seen don't give us much confidence in that.
Got you. So also, getting back to BOL148 for a second. So one of the community members, Control Plus Z, and I were going back and forth talking about this in terms of how strong the IP and the patent for BOL148 is, that it was actually stopping research on other formulations of LSD as well. Can you comment on that at all?
Sure. I've done a lot of research on the BOL148 patent, and it's certainly being used in a very broad manner to sort of brush back a lot of issues. And I think this really also goes back to the lawsuit and some of the allegations in there about Stephen Turnbull's sort of dubious acquisition of that patent. And it seems to me like they, want to enforce it sort of against anything. And I think it's kind of ironic that, Turnbull has a whole charity that he sets up to sort of promote free academic research, but at the same time is really vigorously sort of using this to stifle any competition. And I think it's an overbroad use of the patent. Obviously, it's something that you have to spend millions of dollars in lawyers to really find out exactly how far that patent entails. The patent itself is a very strong patent. It has a lot of really groundbreaking research. I think that its use to sort of stop LSD variants is something that's a bit of a stretch. Obviously, it's whoever has the most lawyers and willing to spend the most money on it, typically in these things. But I think from a prima facie reading of it, it doesn't seem to be like something where that has too much of a leg to stand on.
Got you. Thanks for answering that. All right, so now on to 18MC. So I want to hear. So basically, Mindmed has stopped. They have stopped their 18MC project, correct? All right.
To
So
the best of
now,
my knowledge.
where do you land as far as 18MC? Do you think Mindmed mishandled 18MC? And I just want to get your perspective on 18MC now. I know we spoke about it in the first interview, the Q&A that we did, but I kind of wanted to get the updated perspective.
Sure. I think I mentioned that earlier in this conversation, but I think Mindmed really screwed up in multiple ways in 18MC. For one, they did not, doesn't seem like they did the preclinical work that needed to be done, that the FDA asked for, that the FDA repeatedly asked for. It's something that goes back many years. And it's something that if Barrow really was reading the minutes, as he claims to be this expert on, getting drugs through the FDA process, he would know that they needed to get this work done. And it doesn't seem like they did. And, it's possible the FDA, they did all the work and the FDA said, do more work. But likely they just didn't do the original work that the FDA wanted. When the regulators say jump, you say how high. And when you don't jump and then they say, oh, well, now you have to jump, it's not, you shouldn't be shocked they want you to jump now. And they deny, your ability to walk until you can jump. So that's one issue. And the other issue really I've touched on is, it should have been a 30-day dose. It takes longer time. There's more work involved, but the rewards from that are worth it. The 7-day dose is sort of just like a meh. Like, it's not really worth going through some of these processes for. It's not worth the investor money. But for the 30-day dose, there's a real blockbuster potential here where you have the ability to save tens of thousands of people's lives and prevent millions of people's lives from being ruined by this opioid crisis. It's obviously something that's a serious national priority. And I think by sort of trying to take a shortcut here, it really came back to bite them.
All right, so now let's talk about, so if Freeman Capital we get Scott on the board, and Freeman Capital has more influence on what Mindmed does moving forward, how do you guys go about exploring 18MC again? Can you kind of paint a picture?
Sure. First off, we want to get that LSD to phase 3 study. We want to put the legwork in there and really focus our efforts.
Can you explain why? Because I feel like a lot of the viewers, they hear you talking about getting LSD to phase 3, but they're not making the connection on why you can jump to at phase 3.
Sure. So there's actually no requirement in the FDA process that you do a phase 2B study. It's something Compass did because they didn't have Professor Lectie. We spent millions of dollars on Lectie labs, and one of the real results of that is, we effectively know the dose. We're not going to find out anything crazy from this study. We already know the dose. We already know it's safe. So the real thing here is, we're kind of fine-tuning the dose, which I guess has some merit, but it's not worth the years that it takes to do that. What we're proposing is sort of a 2-arm phase 3 study. So we have a lower dose and a higher dose, which will alleviate any FDA safety concerns regarding that. But LSD is known to be safe. And I think during their, interview, during their sort of after earnings sort of Q&A, they really didn't have a strong answer for why we're doing this. We're not going to find out anything revolutionary, anything new. We already know LSD has high clinical success and efficacy. We know approximately the dose is. It's not worth the time and effort and money to sort of find out a slightly more accurate dose when, we might not have the world's best dose when we go to market, but, going to market in 7 years versus going to market in 4 years is worth the slight decrease in efficacy. And I'm not even sure that will be statistically significant.
Understood. All right, my next question. So now, like, I want to just zoom out a little bit and let's talk about it like this. Uh, how would Freeman Capital, or just once the Freemans can exert more influence on the day-to-day operations going on at Mindmed, how can you basically once again paint a picture for us on how things, number one, would be different, and what is the pathway to profitability for Mindmed? How do you see that? How would you go about that? So just
Sure. So the first thing is obviously I've mentioned Scott will be focusing on getting this phase three application of the FDA. Concurrent to that, we want to do a full-on strategic review and figure out exactly what drugs in the pipeline we should cut, what's worth it, is what in digital medicine, if any, is worth keeping there, and then also going through and figuring out from an employee standpoint, do we have redundant personnel? There are three people in talent acquisition and HR, and they're trying to hire a head of people, which is what they're calling HR. So that's four people there they're trying to get. It's a 40 people operation. That's an incredibly high HR to overall personnel ratio. And it's something that certainly can be streamlined. I'm not doubting the qualifications of anyone working there in terms of HR. I don't necessarily think they're the best fit for mind medicine. There's plenty of other examples of sort of redundant personnel that can be streamlined. We think obviously there's a lot of value in these people, but the question is really cost benefit. Is the cost worth the sort of the marginal return? And that's what the strategic review is really going to be focusing on. And we think that we can cut about $25 million in costs there. Concurrent to that, we're obviously one of the easy things to do is going to be setting up a cash management plan. There's a lot of cash on the balance sheet. Interest rates are high. We want to see that generating some money for mind medicine. There's no reason not to get the extra $4 to $6 million a year, which, when we're cutting costs already, it's just it's an automatic increase that has no risk or no loss to Mindmed. So we're going to be doing that. And those are the two real things that are going to happen outside of the drug development. And that's sort of where we are. And I think that both of those will have significant value to shareholders and really allow Mindmed to cut its cash burn and ultimately get profitable much quicker.
got you. And would you guys can you just speak on how your feelings on dilution? Would you guys is that something that you guys would be very reserved in regards to doing, if at all, and just generally given how things have unfolded now?
Look, dilution has uses. We think what it should really be focusing on is preferred stock offering. There's plenty of precedent in the pharmaceutical industry of using preferred stocks with sort of convertible optionality in there.
Can you just explain to the viewers the difference between preferred stock and
Sure. So preferred stock is sort of like a debt instrument. So it's sort of below debt, so you can't go bankrupt on it. Think about it like this. Basically, you're supposed to pay them $5, let's say, per year. If you don't pay, it sort of just accumulates. And then eventually, until you can pay off shareholders, you have to pay off the preferred stock first. But it doesn't have any bankruptcy risk, which is obviously something we want to avoid. So basically, the idea is to use preferred stock to raise money with a convertibility option. So that means, let's say, the convertibility option is at $30 a share. So basically, Mind Medicine, if the stock price goes above $30, these people can convert their preferred stock into Mind Medicine shares. So dilution will happen at a significantly higher price than what the current market is at. And that will be wherever the market is when we sort of are doing this. So if the market's at 30, we'd be looking at 60 or something like that. Obviously, the exact numbers would change, but basically the idea is to leverage sort of Mindmed's high volatility to essentially reduce costs of capital. And these obviously dilution would occur, but dilution would occur in a way that doesn't hurt any existing shareholders and occurs when existing shareholders made a lot more money.
Understood. Do you think more institutions would start jumping into Mindmed if your plan was put in place?
I think our plan would significantly alleviate a lot of the concerns that many institutions have. So I would probably say yes. I mean, obviously, most institutional ownership is from ETFs. So sort of we think that, in the long term, our plan would unlock enough value that would get Mindmed back into a lot of these indexes, which would then obviously have some ETF and institutional implications as well.
So we know that institutions happen to be just much more savvy when it comes to assessing companies than the average retail investor. So can you speak on some of the some of the things that aren't appealing to institutions right now?
Sure. I think the number one thing here is, management is relatively young, and obviously that's a little ironic coming from me, and pretty somewhat not experienced. Barrow is, he has had no real, role in an executive position such as this. Uh, you know, the same thing can be said about sort of the CFO. He's very qualified, but he hasn't really had the same CEO role or CFO sort of positioning. I think the fact that the interest argument isn't being done speaks to that. I think that's a very simple solution that can be easily employed, and it's something that any CFO really should have a good grasp of cash management. So there's those kind of things. I think the other real issue here is it's a fairly volatile stock right now, and I think there's a lot of real uncertainty, and I think the lack of shareholder communication by management right now is an issue. And obviously that's something we're obviously a lot more transparent and open, and we've been talking, both on Reddit, memes, all over the place. We've been sort of trying to talk to shareholders, and that's something that really differentiates from management. Management obviously has some more, issues in terms of openly communicating, but I think they've been playing things too close to the vest for too long, and it's made people suspicious. And I think that combined with some of these IP issues really, really have it really, discourage people from sort of coming in on the institutional level.
Do you agree with any of the playing too close to the vest stuff? Because once again, in general, that was a warning sign for me, considering how aggressively companies like Compass, Atai, are going after these patents and releasing the patent information like in a timely manner.
Sure, I think there's obviously you can't say everything publicly, uh, but I think playing things close to the vest is an issue. I think being aggressive publicly, as Atai and Compass are doing, is obviously something that's worked out for them overall, and I think that's something Mindmed should have been doing and should do. There's obviously some trade secret stuff that you don't want to have public, but I think for a company like Mind Medicine, there's really nothing that shouldn't get patented that they're doing, and they really should be aggressively pursuing those opportunities. Yeah.
So, all right. So this is just something that popped into my head, something that I keep seeing in the community. So a lot of people are asking, why couldn't you guys, instead of being like, for example, against Mindmed, why couldn't you collaborate with Mindmed?
Look, we tried. We tried very hard. We had 6 weeks of negotiations with them. They put a lot of really not great, somewhat bad faith tactics during those negotiations. For example, they had a deadline on a Monday for some things to sort of keep the negotiations going. Monday, they sort of email us and say, "Hey, we have a full meeting of the board on, I think, Wednesday, and we'll get back to you with an answer then." And then on Wednesday, they were like, "Okay, we had our meeting. We'd love to discuss. Let's discuss next week." And then we basically are like, "Hey, we can discuss, over the weekend. We can discuss Monday, Tuesday." And they sort of just proposed Friday. And then we sort of sent an email back, sort of explaining why we felt time was the issue here. And they sort of just said Friday. They were like, "Okay, Friday it is." We were like, basically at the end of the email, we're like, "If that's the only time that works, we'll do it." And then so they were just like, "Okay, Friday." And then, on Friday, we were very disappointed by their counteroffer. It was insultingly low, and certainly not something that reflects their desire to cooperate and sort of work with us. So we really don't have a choice here. This isn't something we wanted. This is something that was sort of hoisted upon us by management.
Okay, cool. I think that's the message that I really wanted. I think that was important to get out in terms of like, I don't think any company no one wants this to happen, because it's just a waste of resources. It's a waste of money going through all the litigation and whatnot. There are easier ways to solve it. And yeah, that was the main thing here. So, the next one is, so what is your take on the sentiment regarding Robert Barrow currently on social media,
Sure.
everything?
I mean, I've seen a lot of very vivid descriptions of Barrow. I think my favorite one was I guess, management in general. I think my favorite one was saying that management, gorges on Mindmed's coffers like a malnourished hog. It was extremely vivid. And I think, well, I certainly wouldn't say that, but I think the sentiment is there. I think there's a lot of upset investors, and I think that's not something a CEO should be happy about. I think a CEO really, well, their job isn't obviously to make everyone happy. when a lot of people are upset with your decisions, you have to have some introspection and really see, am I doing the right job? Am I, keeping in line with my fiduciary obligations to shareholders? And I think these messages really send a strong, statement to Barrow that something needs to change. And we obviously think that the change is a certain way, uh, but we're open to any change. Really, I think any change is better than no change at this point.
Got you. So, and then the main change that you want, I just want to go back to this, is that there's an issue with the management. You wanted to just replace some members, correct?
So for us right now, obviously we basically in our initial stuff we were saying we wanted to work with management, so we weren't super aggressive in saying what exactly we wanted. But now we're sort of at the point where really the only option is sort of control slate on the board. So that just basically means that we control the board, and ultimately replacing management with people who are more engaged and more willing to work with us to really unlock this value for shareholders, and not just work with us, but work in the best interest of shareholders.
Understood. And now, what's the time horizon do you see for unlocking the value in regards to the Freeman's plan here?
Look, obviously things will take time, and I can't obviously predict the stock market. Otherwise, I don't know if I could predict the stock market with perfect accuracy, that would be something else. But ultimately, we see significant value in that FDA phase three. If it gets approved, that would obviously have a big significant value. We also see unlocking value just by simply cost cuts. Cost cuts will unlock value for shareholders when shareholders realize, you went from having, 2 years of cash, or I guess allegedly had 2 years of cash, to, having like 4 or 5 years of cash. That's something that shareholders can really get behind. Uh, obviously depend on how the market reacts, but, we see from results side of things, within a year of us sort of getting in there, significant results, sort of with our plan. Uh, and obviously, we think that, obviously management leaving and potentially us winning a proxy battle in December would have a significant positive outcome for shareholders.
Understood. Understood. Okay, so getting back to Mindmed management and the employees there and whatnot. So it's like, have you seen anything kind of that sticks out to you in regards to Mindmed's management in general, or the employees that they have? Because it's something that we've been focusing on quite a bit in this Q&A.
Sure, I think I talked a lot about some of the management that's currently there, but I really want to talk about is the former chief legal officer who left abruptly. That's something that's a red flag, and that's something that you got to ask yourself the question of what did she find out that would make it? Was there ethical concerns here? I was looking at her LinkedIn that was posted back when she like first joined MindMed. Someone posted in Reddit. She completely is sort of hidden, and it sort of removed any MindMed reference. I don't know if there was any at the time, but I think it feels like and it seems like she's sort of distancing herself from MindMed. So the question is really what made this all? What was the catalyst for this? When there's smoke, there's fire, and I think this is a big amount of smoke that's billowing out of sort of these regulatory filings, and they sort of just brush her off and don't even mention her anymore. And it's really concerning. And I think this combined with the broader implications here at the IP is something that, the question we have to ask ourselves is, what did Barrow know? Did, Cynthia, have like some kind of reporting, or did she tell Barrow like, hey, something's wrong here, and sort of was forced out? Or was she asked to do something that, doesn't seem to be in her ethical duties as a lawyer? Those are serious issues. And I think, obviously, I know Cynthia probably will not be discussing that publicly, and I'm sure she has an NDA, but I think it's some serious questions here, and I'm sure MindMed will have their own excuses, but it's certainly something because she seems like a very qualified candidate for be general counsel. So it seems like an interesting thing, and also the fact that MindMed hasn't publicly announced a new corporate secretary. Who is the corporate secretary? That's something that in some of the Canadian regulatory documents she's still listed there. We know that she's not there anymore, and I think the question is really there is who is the corporate secretary?
So in terms of like, can you just put piece together? So like Cynthia, or she's the chief legal officer.
Yes, and
So
corporate secretary.
and corporate secretary, and so she left at some point. So can you give kind of dates and kind of put like pencil
Sure.
everything in?
So she actually left on August 11th. During that quarterly meeting was announced. Obviously, she could have left before, but her resignation was announced that day. And given the fact that it's a material thing, it would have had to been previously filed. So my guess is she did technically resign on the 11th. There are some regulatory filings about her that she signed, I think, that go back to like August 26th, but she hasn't really appeared in any of the regulatory filings since then. So sort of in that ballpark. So it seems like a very abrupt nature, given the fact that she was still signing documents, 15 days later. Normally you want to have, and she was already sort of not chief legal officer, but she was signing the documents as chief legal officer 15 days later. So it seems like an interesting sort of last minute sort of resignation. And it really begs the question of why and what was the catalyst and impetus for that.
Do you have any knowledge of other resignations or forced resignations maybe that have happened with Mindmed employees?
Yes, I am aware of several, actually. I'm not at liberty to discuss them, but I am aware that's not an uncommon occurrence. And, in some of my private discussions with these people, serious implications were brought to light. And it's something that I think whenever one of the people I talked to, said that, Cynthia leaving was a big red flag. And that's something that, at the time I kind of brushed it off, but I think that's something now with all this stuff coming out, it's something that really needs to be looked in, and shareholders need answers.
Got you. This leads me to my last question. So, as you know, I am going to be having a Q&A, a discussion with Robert Barrow on Friday. So I thought this would be a great question. What would you ask Robert Barrow if you were conducting the Q&A?
Sure. Is there any agreement, yes or no question, is there any agreement with any company regarding the freedom to operate with LSD, including Ceruvia? That's the first one. Next one is sort of, there have been numerous commingling of employees with Ceruvia in the past. Are you aware of any current employees who have any ties to Ceruvia? And is there any knowledge, to your knowledge, any mixing of intellectual property with respect to any of those employees? And then the final question is the one that's on everyone's mind. Why sell half the company effectively for $30 million? Do you not have any faith in your own vision? Or to what extent do you feel that the market doesn't reflect your vision? And can you elaborate on that? So those would be the kind of the questions that I would ask.
Got you. Throwing anything, he's been also selling his own personal shares, correct?
Yes, he sells them every month for quote unquote tax purposes. I think that also speaks to him not having much faith. And I think actions speak louder than words, and he can say whatever he wants to these questions, potentially in violation of securities laws, depending on how he answers them. But, I think the actions speak loudest, and he sells his own shares. He, feels that, now is the time to do a public offering. There's really no good answer for how that reconciles with a positive vision that he has for the company.
Got you. Thank you very much. All right, guys. Now that is it for the Q&A with Jake Freeman. I hope all of you enjoyed it. If I missed your questions this time, don't worry. I will get to them in the next Q&A with Jake Freeman. I promise. Stay tuned for tomorrow, Friday. We will be releasing the Q&A with Robert Barrow, the CEO of Mindmed. It's going to be a good one. Have a great day, everyone.